The Legislative Council passed legislation on Wednesday which makes all Tasmanians, including religious leaders, mandatory reporters of child sexual abuse. Not to report child sexual abuse will become a criminal offence with punishments of up to 21 years in jail or fines of up to $3,360. The Catholic Church in Tasmania have already said it won't abide by the law where it relates to the confessional because of a directive from Pope Francis that priests are unable to comply with secular law that would force them to break the seal of the confessional. It's based on the theory that a person is not confessing their sins to a priest, but that the priest is a conduit to God, and the person is confessing their sins directly to God. Julian Porteous is Tasmania's most senior Catholic. Archbishop, good morning. Thanks for coming into the studio this morning.
Good morning, Leon. Very pleased to be with you.
Archbishop, you've said in a statement that you'll be unable to follow secular law that requires you to break the seal of the confessional. To be clear, you'll be saying that priests will be expected to remain silent about any information about child sexual abuse that they hear in the confessional.
Yes, that's true. Maybe to start off with, Leon, I'd like to emphasise, as I have before, that we want to comply with the law to the full extent that we can, and priests are very conscious of that. They're very aware of the fact that they are under the law about mandatory reporting along with everybody else. And so the first, our base position is we want to cooperate fully with the law with regard to mandatory reporting. This is a particular issue because, as you described very, very well, actually, that the nature of confession is that it's a moment of encounter with God. And so it has a degree of sacredness around it that has been enshrined in church law for centuries. And just recently the Pope has reiterated that this is the practice of the church that cannot be broken. Priests are deeply conscious of that fact. At the same time, though, it doesn't mean the priest can't be actively engaged if a particular person did come to confession. So if a penitent did come forward and confessed child sexual abuse, the priest would obviously engage with that person, would speak to them about the seriousness, the fact this is a crime, the fact that the law of the land does require mandatory reporting, and would urge the person to actually go to the police. So it's not as though we're backing away from our responsibility, but there is limits to how far we can go.
Archbishop, if this was anybody else, if that person had had the same conversation with a nurse, a teacher, or a police officer, that person would get up and report that conversation to the relevant authorities in the police, but not priests.
That's correct. Probably one of the other things is that a person who did actually confess child sex abuse, in the normal circumstances, a person would only do that because they would know, everybody now knows that mandatory reporting is required, so that it would be very unusual for a person to do that unless they were asking that person some advice or guidance to help them deal with it. If somebody came to the confessional with the knowledge that what they're going to tell the priest was immediately going to be reported to the authorities, I doubt they would come unless they did want to come to say, look, I've done this, it's terrible, help me. And so the priest can actually say, well, look, I want to help you. This is
Archbishop, people will listen to this and think about the pedophilia scandal in the Catholic Church, the epidemic of pedophile priests who were protected in their atrocities by other clergy. The Church, as a legacy, always choosing itself over its victims. How difficult is it to sit here and say again, in the face of laws passed in Tasmania this week, we need to prioritise the church institution over laws that have been passed around the protection of children?
Well, firstly, I think the church has changed dramatically in the last really 20 years. 20 years we've been dealing with this issue. So a lot of it belongs to an earlier period.
But the law of the confessional belongs to an earlier period too.
It does.
Won't people hear you saying again, we're prioritising the laws of the church or the protection of the church and its institutions over laws that apply to everybody else as they relate to children?
Look, I think we don't say this is protecting the person who's committed child sex abuse. We would be doing everything we can to help the person address this question. We're not protecting a person. We're working with them, and we'd want to work with them. The whole culture of the church has dramatically changed. I've been very active, as we have generally across the world, in addressing this issue. We've in all our parishes, we're having programs to alert people to our responsibility for child safety. We've been very, very proactive. We've been doing a lot of things. The culture of the church has changed, and we would continue to promote child safety in every possible way that we can. So it's not that we are trying to protect ourselves, quite the opposite. We're doing everything we can to ensure the protection of children.
Elise Archer, the State's Attorney General, says, quote, "There is no excuse for the failure to report the horrific abuse of children, least of all for institutions that have been named by the Royal Commission as failing to prevent child abuse in the past." They're her lines directly, and she's thinking about church institutions, including yours. What is your response to that? I mean, these laws are actually designed specifically for organisations like yours.
I would say we're complying with those laws, those mandatory reporting laws right across the board. There's one particular sticking point, that's to do with the confessional. The other thing is I just think it's true that if a person knew that they would be reported, the chances of them coming to confession would just be absolutely zero. However, if that law still has, the priest has a chance to work with that person. The confessional is also about helping a person address and face issues in their life. In this case, a priest would say to the person that this is a crime, and there's mandatory reporting required for this. You need to go to the police. You can't not address this question yourself because of the seriousness of it.
On Mornings Around Tasmania, Archbishop of Hobart, His Grace Julian Porteus is our guest this morning. And you can join us too. Love to hear your thoughts this morning, 0438 922 936. Paul Collins says, and he's a former Catholic priest and a person we talk to fairly regularly on mornings, he says, look, this is a less relevant issue anyway because very few people actually go to confession. How many people go to confession, Archbishop, in the average week in Tasmania?
I can't put a number on it, but certainly confession is still practice of the church. It's probably not as strong as it has been in the past. However, it is a sacrament, and for many people, it's a very significant way in which they're able to deal with issues and struggles and problems in their life. Many people find that they get a great deal of help and guidance through the confessional. So it's still a very valid expression of Catholic life that is very helpful for many people.
Let's move on to other matters because there's lots going on. And I think we're also interested in talking with you. A few weeks ago when the federal government released their draft religious discrimination bill, which reignited the debate about how far the law should go in protecting people who have religious views and their ability to express those views. So the draft bill was released last month to safeguard people from religious discrimination. Some say it goes much farther than any anti-discrimination laws in Australia, and it specifically overrides anti-discrimination laws such as Tasmania's anti-vilification protections. Why do we need these laws, Archbishop?
Well, I think firstly, a person's religious faith is something really foundational to themselves, to their identity, to their worldview, to their moral stances on issues and so on. It's something which is a fundamental human right. It's been recognised in international covenants that religious freedom is... Now, it's not an absolute right. It's not as though it's the only right, but it's not a lower right. It is, I would say, one of the foundational human rights. Now, what I think the bill, and I think the bill has made a positive contribution, is it's brought forward that fact that a religious freedom is a foundational right in our society and should be respected as such. Now, it will come in conflict with other rights at different times. We understand that. And certainly it's not any mandate for being above the law or breaking the law.
Are you happy that it would seek to override and specifically mentions Tasmania's anti-discrimination laws?
It does, because Tasmanian's anti-discrimination law has the lowest bar of all the laws in Australia. It's unique because it includes the word offence, which was the issue that was brought against myself. And so it recognises that somebody who is speaking formally on a religious subject, like myself, have a right to do that and not be accused of offending somebody because they don't agree with it. I think one of the important things about religious freedom is all we want is the right to live by what we believe. Now, people may disagree with that, and that's fine, and we can engage in dialogue with people who don't agree. But I think the most important thing is that we recognise that religious faith is fundamental to a person's identity.
What about where it intersects with another person in the life that they're living, in the case of an LGBTI person, for example, where what the Catholic Church believes, what the Church more comprehensively believes, might really harm and affect the esteem, might really affect the way of living of somebody who is living as a gay person, as an intersex person, and so on.
Sure. I think the first thing we would say is that we respect people in their particular choices and their particular worldviews. At the same time, we'd ask them to respect us, that we would have particular views about the nature of the human person, about marriage, for instance. We'd have those views. Now, we're not condemning the other person. We're just saying that we believe things differently to yourself. So all we'd ask is that you would also, as we want to respect you, that you would also want to respect us, that we have different views to you on a particular matter. Israel
Folau's not of your church. He's
no.
a different part of the faith. But when he says, homosexuals go to hell, can you understand how that feels for...
Well, he didn't say that. He quoted from the letter to the Romans, so he's quoted a scriptural text which speaks about certain things as being not acceptable in God's eyes. He speaks about, look, if you don't repent. So he says, he urges, as St. Paul did, look, there are certain things which you may be doing, and there were a number of issues that were raised. If you're doing these things, then look again, because you are threatening your well-being, your eternal well-being. So I think, again, we have a right to do that, to say that things. People can disagree. All we're saying is we want to sort of say these are things that we believe, and we want to be able to live by them and express them.
On Mornings Around Tasmania, His Grace Julian Porteous, the Archbishop of Hobart, our guest in the studio this morning. Finally this morning, Archbishop, happy to see Madeleine Ogilvie heading back into Tasmania's Parliament, a prominent Catholic. I'm happy to see her in there.
Well, I'm pleased that that issue has been resolved. She's coming in as an independent. That was her own particular choice. I do, like you, I wish her well in taking that role on again in Parliament.
Thanks for coming in this morning.
Thank you very much, Leon.